Hello, hello. Good afternoon, Voices of Color class, or if you are just a random person who's watching, good afternoon to you as well. I hope all of you had a great weekend. I didn't do very much this weekend, but that's okay. We stand for that. Yeah, so I don't think I have very many updates for all of you. My hair is getting really long and it really bothers me. So if you see me brushing my hair out of my face a lot, that is the reason why. For reference, I rarely ever let my hair get this long. Most of you who see me know that I typically have an undercut for most of the time. Like, I'll have my sides cut pretty short, and then even like my top part, I usually don't keep very long either, mostly just because I don't like to have to do stuff with my hair. I just kind of like to let my hair be natural and have it be like, do its own thing. But I mean, with my hair this long now, I actually have to like kind of do stuff with it. Otherwise, it's just like a mess and it's just everywhere. I took a shower this morning, so my hair is like kind of being nice right now, but it's still kind of in that state where it's like too clean, like you know how like you wash your hair and it's usually not that good. Like, it doesn't feel that good. It just like doesn't have enough in it. But then like a day later, after you've had like a little bit of time for your hair to kind of build up some of its natural oils again, suddenly it becomes like super bomb hair. So tomorrow's gonna be a good hair day. Today is not a good hair day yet. It's a lot of brushing my bangs out of my face. So today on the schedule, I guess we're just gonna go through the next lesson. Last week I ended up not doing this, and I don't really know why. I think I just wasn't feeling it last week, but this week I am, so we're gonna go through it. So we have our part 2, a timeline of you. So if you did last week's assignment, which you should definitely do, last week's assignment was all about kind of digging into your identity and like who you are, what makes you who you are, etc. And now we are actually going to do a little bit of digging into like the how did you get to this point. So that's why our next project is actually going to be like making a timeline. So if I just click on this first kind of like the information I put through, timelines. So timelines can be a powerful visual tool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, actually. It's a little bit small. So timelines can be a powerful visual tool to see both individual events in time and also see how many things change over time. Surely you're not the same person you were when you were 8 years old, and in 10 years from now, you're not going to be the same person you are today. Timelines have been used to express important parts of a history, including things like cycles of oppression. If you click on the picture to the left, you'll see an example of a timeline about race in America. Something that's great about this particular timeline is that it documents both the positive and the negative effects, or the effects of different events. So the directions of this first activity is to just kind of like scroll through and skim the timeline, choose one event to do a quick Google search about, and then just answer these 3 questions in the drop box below. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. I thought that this was a pretty interesting thing that Oprah put together. Typically when we have a timeline, first of all, when it comes to timelines are super subjective because obviously there's no way that we could put every single event on a timeline. Like, that would just be impossible. So when you're making a timeline, you have to be pretty selective about what you want to be on the timeline, or else you have to just pick like a general theme of what the timeline is going to be about. And so for this one, Oprah picked race relations in the United States. And so it starts as far back as like literally going back to like the birth of the United States, even in like the 1700s. So in the 1790s, some progress that was made to improve the state of race in America was Benjamin Franklin petitions Congress to abolish slavery. But one of the downsides, or one of the things that regressed during that time, is the petition tabled 1 month later, Naturalization Act of 1790 limits citizenship to whites. So even though Benjamin Franklin might have been fighting to abolish, slavery of both African Americans, and I think Native Americans were also being used as indentured servants at this time, that was like pushed away and pushed down, and so that's why slavery kind of like sprang up. Which is actually very ironic because many black people actually fought in the Revolutionary War, so just makes you think. 1852, so some progress as Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin passionately advocates for the end of slavery. However, one of the things that regressed during that time is, and advances pervasive stereotypes, Mammy Pickaninny, Tragic Mulatto, and Uncle Tom. So even though this book was very big for kind of exposing like the state of slavery in America, at the same time, a lot of people who don't understand the kind of complexities of what it means to be black in America, especially during that time, were like kind of taking this as like the gospel truth, or like they were considering it almost like this is how you understand black people, or like the black experience, which, you know, that's never true. No single book, no single document is ever going to capture the experience of an entire group of people. We still see these kind of issues happen today. This is honestly why a lot of times when I come across things like, I don't know, what's a good example recently? When I come across like movies and TV shows that feature like a lot of like for me specifically, like a lot of like the LGBTQ plus experience or the Asian American experience, I always kind of take it with like a grain of sand, where I'm like, yeah, that's true, but also at the same time, that's not true for everyone's experience as an Asian American in America, or as an LGBTQ plus person in America. So I don't know. This is like one of those things where, like, as we kind of move forward into the future, I see a lot of these issues probably getting better, and so that way, like, we get a broader representation, and we also have a better understanding that this single representation doesn't necessarily represent every single person in the world. Let's go ahead and jump ahead to, oh, look, okay, here are some modern things right here. So here's one in 2004. So President Bush proposes guest worker plan permitting undocumented immigrants working in the U.S. to apply for temporary status. Okay, sounds good. Regress, though, but allows U.S. Border Patrol agents to deport them with no hearing before immigration judge. Yeah. All right. Here's another one. Progress. Sonia Sotomayor becomes the first Latina Supreme Court justice. Cool. Regress. Harvard professor, renowned scholar Henry Louis Gates Jr. arrested on suspicion of breaking and entering at his own home. I think I remember this, actually. I think I remember this story. So basically, it's just like I think that's him right there. But like basically a black man who, I just want to like Google this just so that way it's like I'm not incorrect. Yeah, so that's him. So basically he's a black man who is literally just trying to go home, and then people are like, oh my gosh, a black man in this neighborhood, obviously he's trying to rob this place. Yeah, that still happens. I mean, like, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, yeah, I don't need to go into all that, but 2017. So, progress. Federal courts halt enforcement of President Trump's order effectively banning Muslim immigration from 7 countries. However, regress. Trump signs revised order, stays silent in face of increasing violence against mosques, moves toward Dakota Access Pipeline, Mexican border wall, oh my gosh. And then they end with a ... just to show that, like, it keeps going. It doesn't even stop there. Yeah, there's a lot of issues that are definitely still going on, and honestly, if we were to, okay, my water bottle's blocking that. I want to see when was this article published? Okay, it doesn't say when this article was published. I'm really curious about when this article was published, though, because like they stop at 2017, and obviously a lot has happened. Ooh, my camera's kind of like not centered. Hold on a second. Let me mess. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. There it is. Better. Yeah, I'm just curious about like when this was published, because it ends at 2017, and you know, we know that a lot has happened in even just the past 3 years since 2017. I mean, like, oh gosh, I can't even. Wow. It feels like everything between 2017 and now feels like a fever dream. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so the directions, just pick one of the things on this list, because, you know, I'm guessing that you don't know every single thing that happened on this list. I appreciate that there's a mixed variety of races represented on this list, and it's not all just like black, black relations. Because I think that unfortunately it tends to become one of the things that anytime we talk about like the history of race in America, so much of it just comes back down to like the black-white dynamic, even though there are a lot of other like cultures and dynamics to keep in mind as well. All right, so go ahead and do that, and then the next part is actually giving you some directions about how to make your timeline. So quick overview is that your timeline will consist of 5 to 10 events from your life that answer this question. So what are the major events in your life that greatly impacted your identity development? And a good way that you can think about this is you can think back to the identities you have included for your artifact number 1 last week, or you can expand to other identities as well. So for example, we've got the identity iceberg over here. Your timeline can either focus on multiple identities or just one identity, so it's up to you. So for example, if I just wanted to focus on my racial identity as an Asian person, I can have a whole timeline just about my racial identity. Or if I wanted to do kind of skitter-scatter, like this is my gender identity, my sexual identity, my racial identity, my ethnic identity, like I can kind of spread it out if I want to. So first you have to brainstorm what events that you want to do. And I realized that it might be kind of hard to think about those, so I actually came up with a list of questions for you to think about. So for example, when was the first time you noticed one of your specific identities? When was the time you noticed one of your identities helped you fit in or made you stick out? When was a time you wish you didn't have a certain identity? When was a time you were proud to claim a certain identity? And when was a time you noticed a major change in the way you identified? So again, these questions aren't necessarily like every single, like you don't have to answer all these questions, but these are just kind of starting points for you to think about, like for you to start thinking about some major events that have happened in your life. So after you kind of think about some of the things that are happening, step 2 is to reflect on the event. So once you have thought of that event that you want to reflect on, answer these questions for each event. Each event should have about a paragraph, so that would be about 5 to 8 sentences total. And from what I've seen in the past with my other Voices of Color class from first semester is that most people tend to write actually quite a bit for these, because most people like really do take this as a moment of reflection. And I do recommend that you reflect kind of deeply on this. Obviously, as a teacher, I can't necessarily like assess how deep you reflect on something, but at the same time, like, you know, I am creating a space for you to kind of think about your life in a very critical way. And so I hope you take advantage of this opportunity, especially as all of you are, you know, preparing to go off to college and jobs and things. So the questions that I want you to answer is just, what is the story behind this event? So just kind of explaining what this is. What identities did this event make you realize? And then how has this event shaped the way you currently view your identity? So again, kind of like a what happened, what identity was it, how does this make you view your identity? And step 3 is kind of like the more fun, artsy part of it. So for each of your timeline pieces, I want you to find and create one image that matches with the event. This can either be literal or symbolic. So I've got an example of a literal picture. So if my story is about the first time I went to school, I might find a picture of me on the first day of school. Or I might find a picture of like just a school building. That's a very like literal picture. However, if I wanted a more symbolic picture, if my story is about the first time I went to school and how I felt very alone because I was the only Hmong kid, I might find a picture of a flower in a field by itself where the flower is symbolic of how I felt. So again, this is definitely a lot more artistic. It requires a little more interpretation, but I wanted to leave that open just in case you wanted to use that room to like interpret and be creative with this. So again, you get that kind of creative choice in how you decide to do this. Your question might be though, but Mr. Herb, where do I do all of this? And that's a great question. I have attached for you a graphic organizer that you can actually use to set up your timeline. So there are 10 of these total. You have to use at least 5 of them. And when you're doing this, make sure that you just make a copy of it, and you'll do that by just like going up to File and then clicking on, oh, you know what? You can't even see that. Should I move my picture? Ah, it's fine. So you go up here to make a copy, and then you would just click on that, and you would make a copy of that into your own drive. So this is where you would just put all your stuff. I made the graphic organizer for you, but Of course, you can always use a different app if you would like. If you wanted to make a literal timeline, because this isn't actually a literal timeline. This is more so just kind of a graphic organizer. But if you wanted to do a literal timeline, like, you know, draw a big line on a paper and like put the dates on it, you can absolutely do that as well. Again, you kind of get some freedom in how creative you want to be with this, or if you just want to fill out the graphic organizer. So after that, I do have a spot for you to upload your graphic organizer, or to upload your timeline. Make sure that if you do it on a doc, that you also share that doc with me, otherwise I won't actually have access to view it. Alternatively, you can also put it in your Voices of Color folder in your Google Drive, because that Voices of Color folder was made by the school and it's already shared with you and also with me. So it's super easy for me to have access to it already. So that's really like, I guess that's really kind of like the big like lesson of the week, is just doing the timeline. And I'm hoping that you do spend some time just thinking through the timeline and thinking through like what major events actually have shaped you to who you are. And you know, I think this is actually a very beneficial thing to do every couple years in your life, just to think like, how have the last couple years shaped me? I know for myself, I'm actually going through the same exact process right now as I start looking into applying to grad school again. I'll be applying over the summer and in the fall of next year. And, you know, I really am kind of reflecting on like what have been the big impactful moments ever since I graduated from college that are going to impact the way that I kind of operate and move throughout the next phase of my life, which hopefully, fingers crossed, is going to be grad school. Any of you who are going to UW-Madison, you may end up seeing me on campus if I actually get in. Let's hope I do. So the other thing that I have for you is I have another weekly mini analysis for you. So I included the picture of John Cho right here just because the thing I'm going to have you read is about John Cho, or written by John Cho. So this week we've got an op-ed written by John Cho, an Asian American actor. He wrote this op-ed in reaction to how specifically in America, have been treating people with Asian heritage. So I've seen this article pop up multiple times on my social media because I'm Asian American, and I also follow a lot of Asian American people, aka a lot of my friends and family. And anyways, I realized that the complexities of Asian American heritage history will be pretty new to most of you, as Asian American history isn't currently included in most school curriculum beyond Japanese internment camps or Chinese exclusionary immigration laws. So what I want you to do is, I just want you to go to the article, and then the big question that I have for you is, what does it mean to truly belong in quotes, in America? And how do we as a society get to a point where people, all people, not just Asians, can truly belong and not conditionally belong, as John Cho suggests? Let's go ahead and take a read through the article together then. I think this is a really well-written op-ed. John Cho, I actually recently listened to a podcast with him, and the podcast series is called Asian Enough, and it's all about like Asian American issues, Asian American celebrations, etc. And it's a pretty new podcast. It's only like a couple episodes in. You can find it on like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Google Podcast, whatever the equivalent of the Google Podcast is. And I would like, if you're curious about Asian American issues, I would recommend listening to the Asian Enough podcast. Like, I would say it's a pretty good representation of the struggles that Asian Americans currently are going through, but they also go through a lot of history as well, which I appreciate. Every episode they bring a different like celebrity or a different guest person on to talk about their experiences. And so John Cho was on the podcast a couple episodes ago. Cool. So I'll just start reading this and you can follow along. So I called my parents a few nights ago to tell them to be cautious when stepping out of the house because they might be targets of verbal or even physical abuse. It felt so strange. Our roles had flipped. My plea mirrored the admonitions I received from them as a child growing up in Houston. The world, they cautioned, was hostile and it viewed us as strangers. So they warned me to stick close to my family, close to my kind. The fact that the coronavirus seems to have originated in China has spawned a slew of anti-Asian hate crimes across the country. Asian American parents and children are making versions of the call I made. Friends are sharing first-hand accounts of abuse on text chains and circulating articles on Facebook, always ending with the suddenly ominous, "Stay safe." Growing up, the assumption was that once we became American enough, there would be no need for such warnings, that we would be safe. To that end, my parents encouraged me and my younger brother to watch as much television as possible so that we might learn to speak and act like the natives. The hope was that race would not disadvantage us, the next generation, if we played our cards right. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. When I became an actor, maybe as a result of all that TV, and really started to work, I felt glimmers of my parents' hope coming to fruition. Doors were open, strangers were kinder. In some ways, I began to lead a life devoid of race, but I've learned that a moment always comes along to remind you that your race defines you above all else. It might be a small moment, like a salesperson greeting you with "Konnichiwa," or it might be a string of moments, like the press tour at Cal Penn, and I took to promote Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle in 2004, a few years after 9/11. Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, that's a comedy movie from 2004. We flew across the country, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Seattle, and it became a grim routine. Flight after flight, Cal would be pulled aside for a random search. On one leg of the tour, Cal's friend Gabe joined us, and when we hit security, Cal was selected for a search, while Gabe and I flew through unscathed. We gathered our bags and waited on a bench for Cal to be released. Rummaging through his backpack, Gabe suddenly said, "Cal's going to be annoyed." When I looked inside it, I realized why. Gabe, who is white, had gone camping recently and had neglected to remove his Rambo-sized hunting knife from his backpack. I gasped and looked back at Cal, who had been watching a transportation security administration worker empty the contents of his bag. It was a reality check. Asian Americans are experiencing such a moment right now. The pandemic is reminding us that our belonging is conditional. One moment we are Americans, the next we are all foreigners who brought the virus here. Like fame, the model minority myth can provide the illusion of racelessness, putting select Asians on a pedestal silences those who question systemic injustice. Our supposed success is used as proof that the system works, and if it doesn't work for you, it must be your fault. Never mind that 12% of us are living below the poverty line, the model minority myth helps maintain a status quo that works against people of all colors. But perhaps the most insidious effect of this myth is that it silences us. It seduces Asian Americans and recruits us to act on its behalf. It converts our parents, who in turn encourages us to accept it. It makes you feel protected, that you're passing as one of the good ones. And because the stereotypes may be complimentary, hardworking, good at math, it makes people, including us, think that anti-Asian sentiment is somehow less serious, that it's racism light. That allows us to dismiss the current wave of Asian hate crimes as trivial, isolated, and unimportant. Consider the comedians who mock Asians, but restrain themselves when it comes to other groups. Of course, with the falsely positive comes the negative stereotypes. You're sneaky, you're stealing jobs, you're corrupt. And after I had been busted for cheating on a Latin quiz in high school, I recall my teacher asking, "Why are Koreans such cheaters?" During times of national stress, it's these darker stereotypes that prevail. My wife's family were incarcerated in camps during World War II, even while her great-uncles were serving in an all-Japanese American battalion of the U.S. Army. Vincent Chin, a Chinese-American auto worker, was brutally beaten to death in Detroit in 1982, blamed for the Japanese takeover of the auto industry. And just recently, an Asian woman in Brooklyn had acid thrown at her while she was taking out the trash. Another among the skyrocketing attacks against Asians. I came to this country in 1978 at the age of 6. I was naturalized on November 21st, 1990. During the military buildup before the start of the Gulf War, I remember being surprised by the judge at the ceremony asking me whether I would defend my country in uniform if called upon. I wasn't expecting that question, though my friends and I had been wondering about a possible draft, and I took my time to truly consider it. I answered yes, and I meant it. I claimed the citizenship my parents wanted for me, and I think I've spent my life earning it. I'm not going to let anyone tell me, or anyone who looks like me, that we are not really American. And the coronavirus has taught me anything, it's that solution to a widespread problem cannot be patchwork. Never has our interconnectedness and our reliance on each other been plainer. You can't stand up for someone and not for others. And like the virus, unchecked aggression has the potential to spread wildly. Please don't minimize the hate or assume it's somewhere far away. It's happening close to you. If you see it in the streets, say something. If you hear it at work, say something. If you sense it in your family, say something. Stand up for your fellow Americans. Wow. So, I really liked this op-ed. I kind of appreciate his call to his call to action at the end of it. For the most part, I actually think that this op-ed is pretty, like, what's the word? I think it's pretty, like, safe, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think even though op-ed is short for, like, an opinion piece, I don't actually think that he necessarily puts out a super extreme or a super severe opinion out there into the world. Like, he's basically just talking about some of the experiences of Asian American folk and kind of how things have shaped and been changed throughout time. And, like, the whole idea of being, like, as he says, like, being conditionally accepted, I just think that that's such a fascinating concept about how there are, like, kind of degrees of being accepted in America right now. You know, on one end of the spectrum, actually, I don't even know if I would necessarily call it, like, a spectrum. Like, I don't know if I would call it, like, a spectrum as in, like, a line. I think I would almost call it, like, it feels like, to me, like, more of a dartboard. And I mean, honestly, dartboards have been how I've been kind of, like, thinking about more and more things, because I just feel like so much less exists on, like, a straight line spectrum, and so much of it is just kind of like an ambiguous blob where everything exists in its own space. And so, like, on one hand, you have, like, Black people who are, you know, being brutalized, who are still so negatively impacted by systemic issues. I mean, even with coronavirus, like, the percentage of deaths that have just been Black people is, like, astounding. And then at the same time, you have other groups of people, like you have the Latinx community who are discriminated because people assume they're all undocumented. You have the Asian community, for example, like, struggling to fit in, but also kind of fitting in a little bit easier than, say, the Black or the Latinx community. You have the Muslim and, like, the Arabic community who are all assumed to be terrorists. Like, I feel like every single group is definitely kind of struggling in its own way. And this term of, like, being conditionally accepted, I feel like is a really good way to explain how Asian people are being treated in the current system. Because, again, I don't think that we're necessarily, like, I don't think Asian Americans are necessarily, like, as like, oppressed as, say, like, Black people, because, you know, we have the evidence that says Black people are just, like, I mean, they're literally being killed at higher rates than other people. And there's a much, like, deeper history of racism behind that as well. But, like, yeah, so, like, I feel like conditionally accepted is a good way to put it. And I also appreciate that John Cho doesn't try to make, I appreciate that he doesn't try to make it, like, an us versus them kind of thing. Like, he doesn't try to come out and say, like, hey, the Asian American struggle is just as bad as the Black struggle, or just as bad as the Muslim struggle, or just as bad as the Latinx struggle. He just says, like, hey, this is the Asian American struggle. And I really appreciate that about this piece. I feel like sometimes I come across pieces, like op-eds especially, where they focus so hard on trying to, like, put Asian American issues in the forefront that they kind of forget that, you know, Asian American issues are important, yes, but also they exist within a bigger network of issues. So we can't just ignore all the other issues. We have to, like, everything has to be contextual. Everything has to kind of fit together. So coming back to this question, what does it mean to truly belong in America, and how do we as a society get to a point where people, all people, not just Asians, can truly belong and not conditionally belong, as John Cho suggests? I don't know. This is a really tough question. Like, I'm not gonna lie, you Voices of Color folk, I purposely give you some of these really tough questions out there because like realistically, these are kind of the questions that you're gonna have to start asking yourself, because many of you are able to vote now that you're 18. Many of you are going to be making some pretty big life decisions. Many of you are going to make some pretty big social decisions as well. Like, are you going to choose to stick with your friend groups, your family groups, the people that you've grown up with all the time? Or are you going to kind of go out there and explore and look for your own belief system or whatever? And so I do want you to think a bit about this. Like, do you feel like you truly belong in America? Do you feel like everyone truly has a belonging in America? Or do you feel like it's still pretty one-sided and one-dimensional right now? I don't know. I just want to know, like, your opinions about this. I don't think any single person has, like, a good answer for this yet, because, like, if we had an answer, we wouldn't be answering, or we wouldn't need to ask this question, but it's still standing. We have not quite figured this out yet. If you want my honest opinion about this, and I'm just gonna kind of like go off on my own spiel for a little bit, but like, what does it mean to truly belong in America? Gosh, that's so tough. I don't even know what that means for myself. I guess if it really came down to it, I think what it would mean to truly belong in America would be to have people ask fewer questions about who you are or like why you exist. Because you see, I feel like the reason why the reason why we keep having to have discussions about race, about gender, about LGBTQ plus, like whatever, about socioeconomic status, like the reason why we even have to have these discussions is because there's a difference in how a white person is treated versus a black person, poor versus rich, etc., like all the different dynamics. Like the only reason why we even have to differentiate between all these different things is because as a society, we still treat these identities as different. Like if we truly got to a point where something like gender didn't matter, we wouldn't have to talk about gender anymore. Like you could like think about it, like what's another good example for this? Like think about like your fingers, for example. Like most people, if they are born without mutations or if they haven't had an amputation, most people will have 10 fingers, and that's just kind of the assumption. We don't have to like identify ourselves as having 10 fingers, because for the most part, having 10 fingers or not having 10 fingers like doesn't so severely kind of change your experience as an American. It might change certain things, like you might not be able to participate in the same exact way, but like for the most part, I think we don't go around being like, hi, my name is Mr. Her and I have 10 fingers. How many fingers do you have? However, if we ever did get to a point where finger count did matter, like maybe, I don't know, like if we ever went to like this weird post-apocalyptic dystopian world where it's like, people with 10 fingers are special because they haven't had their fingers stolen yet. I don't know. I'm just coming up with like a really weird example. I think it would be different then. Like, then maybe fingers would matter. In the same way that, like, I don't know, if we truly didn't care about race, or like if race truly didn't have an impact on your life experience, we probably wouldn't talk about race as much. And that's kind of the truth about that. However, that's not the reality we live in. The reality we live in is that race does matter, because race does have a really big impact on how you are seen and how your life is going to operate. And unfortunately, it's going to stay like that for a very long time, because there is, like, racism is so deeply rooted in human history. Not even just American history, like human history. So I think it's going to be a very long time before we actually kind of figure out what it means, how to get to a point where we don't have to have these discussions. But until that time, we're going to keep having these discussions. I do have an unrelated question, but it's still like kind of related. So I have like a video for all of you to watch. Oh my gosh, I'm such a dork. I didn't even attach the video. What the heck? Oh my gosh, I hate my life. Okay, hold on a second while I pull up this video and then attach it to the assignment. Oh my goodness. Wow. I am so good at life. Alright. Okay, I finally got it. What the heck? And nobody said anything. All of you dorks just like wrote your comments without even watching the video. Oh, I shouldn't blame you. It wasn't you. It was me. Because, I mean, whatever. Yeah, so anyways, I have like this video. It was from a couple months ago, like right when it went from 2019 to 2020. It's just like a video reviewing what happened in 2010 and going through history and all that kind of stuff. And then my question for you is just like, what is your highlight and low light from your life during 2010 to 2020? I definitely have highlights and lowlights. And you know what, maybe I'll just like write up my post right now. I would say highlight of 2010 to 2020. So the highlight of 2010 to 2020 is I became a way more confident person. Believe it or not, like the person you know today is very different than the person that I used to be in, even in college. Like teacher school, I was basically the person I am today, but like most of my undergrad of college, I was a pretty, I don't know, not confident person. And then something finally clicked for me. I think mostly revolving around my gender and sexuality. And once I kind of got that sorted out, my life just kind of made more sense. So yeah, it was really freaking hard to build a self-confidence, but that's my highlight and low light right there. I'm gonna post that up. Boop! There it is. Well, I think that's all I've got for all of you. That's all the content that I've got for all of you. So if you have any questions, make sure that you send me an email at some point, or you can drop by the office hours, which again do happen on Fridays at 1 o'clock. Yeah. No. What time? Yeah. No, Fridays at like 11, I think. Yeah. It's like 11. It's somewhere around there. Somewhere around that time on a Friday. Thank you for tuning into the stream if you're watching this live, or if you're watching this after the fact, thank you for also tuning in as well. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoyed it. That's all I've got for you for today, and I will see you all next time. Bye, y'all.